Kelley, we're back and welcome everyone. Today's live stream. It's all about rethinking franchise growth strategy 2026. We're well into Q1 and having some amazing conversations. During one of our last live streams, we talked about our franchise growth report and what brands we're focusing on. And so today I thought it'd be a great opportunity for everyone on the live stream and for Kelley and I to discuss, what creates explosive growth, where franchisors are going wrong, and what we could all be doing for our businesses. So, Kelley, I'm looking forward to the conversation. And, Fran Camp was very interesting. The last Fran Camp in Miami, we're now in Q1. The concern for all business owners and for all of us is, how do we get that growth cycle going? And I think we had a call today with a client of ours, amazing brand. It's leading the industry. Great founders and team. And when you look behind the scenes, you realize they've achieved all of this, but there's so much more they could be doing. And the things we were focusing in on related to website, brand positioning, AI, SEO focus, content focus, broker focus. And so I think a lot of little steps. And, if I just frame it, one big item here, which was during Fran Camp, as we pulled data, and today we'll just talk about the question that we ask so many franchisors: what's the number one thing missing for explosive growth? When we look at the responses and the distribution, 40% said, well, for explosive growth, I need better lead flow and pipeline. Then 25% said sales process, and it kept going down: brand story, validation, and then leadership. And something Nick Powell's has mentioned, we've been discussing is, many times it's almost like the priorities are in reverse.
Yeah.
And you get nervous. You want to focus on the shiny objects, the leads, but there's more work to be done at the franchise brand level. So how do we start approaching this?
Yeah, I think it'd be helpful to kind of go through these, line by line, and what this actually means as a franchisor. But I have to pause for a second and just say, your point is so amusing in hindsight, not obviously at the time to me, because I always thought in the beginning that my number one problem was lead flow, better leads, and pipeline. And we invested a whole lot of money, and we invested a whole lot of resources into that, only for it to almost come crashing down, because that very last thing on the list, which was the leadership time and capacity, was actually where we needed to build first. And so, that when you say a lot of people, have that list backwards, I literally had that backwards. And we were able to course correct, thankfully, but not easily. And so that's really insightful.
Kelley, so let's build down a plan. We're going to work off this topic. One of the insights as we were evaluating the data was, of course, the brands themselves. Is there alignment between their franchise sales sort of promises and how their FDD is structured in terms of the franchise buyers? But also, I think it's just focusing at not in a negative way, at a superficial level of how many leads do I have? What is that lead flow? Versus diagnosing in the past year, what were our best leads? Where did they come from? And what were the conversion assets we used? But for the franchisors out there, startup, emerging, and beyond that, if we're putting together a game plan for Q2 to start executing on, what would be some of the touch points or things you'd be focused on? And if we went through this list in reverse, starting with leadership and time, and going through validation and ending at lead flow?
Yeah, that's a great question, Charles. I think that the leadership focus, time, and capacity is, again, I think one of the core things that a lot of franchisors skip. And I don't think it's intentional. Leadership focus is always a tough one. And we talked to so many franchisors about this, because there's a really big disconnect in running your local business and becoming a franchisor. Those are two entirely different businesses that require very different leadership. So I think, there's this kind of honeymoon period where founders and leaders are, they're finding their footing. And I think you have to allow yourself to kind of learn your new job before you flood the system. but that time and that internal capacity, that's a tough one too. And I say, I learned much too late that was the problem we were having. But with especially a new brand, like I think we underestimate how much time we need to invest in our franchisees, especially those first 5, because we're learning right alongside of them. And I think, the initial reaction can be, might be, it'll take us 2 weeks to train these people, so I need 2 weeks per franchisee. And so I can take on 40, I can take on all of these because it's only going to take this amount of time. And I think, almost always we find that time has been underestimated, typically because the systems aren't in place yet, or we're developing them alongside of growing the franchise. And that can cause a lot of cracks to form really early on.
Kelley, so as I'm thinking about your comments and leadership focus, right? One image I have many times is sometimes when franchise brands are struggling, and maybe they have a significant number of locations where they feel like sales have dried up, I feel like they're spending their precious time on the lead flow and going to conferences and meeting with brokers, and they're misdiagnosing the issue. They're not spending time on the core issues that are identified on this chart. And so example being, I could see a franchise founder or leadership team going to 3 or 4 broker conferences, spending money on promotion, spending money on digital, and outside looking in, and this applies to all of our businesses, I'm like, boy, if they just hit a semi-pause button and really sat down as a leadership team and inventoried, well, what is our validation with our existing franchisees? If we don't have them, what is that sort of social proof or franchisee proof? And maybe the answer is the more detail. How is our brand story positioned for when we do have the conversations with brokers? And more important, when we're not meeting them directly, but they're referring a client over, when they're referring a prospect over, the conversion cycle, and then improving sales process and lead flow. So I almost feel like, you get into that fight or flight mentality, run to the conferences, pay to be in a publication, meet brokers, and you're missing the essence of what's inside the brand.
Absolutely. And I think more often than not, and again, I will lump myself into this, you spend so much time and money and resources selling something that you're not really sure what you're selling yet. And, so I think that really identifying your brand story, the positioning, the awareness of your brand, those dollars and that time is so much more meaningful if you've established that first.
Yeah, and Kelley, so we've had a couple of conversations, and on Good Spark, which is our accelerator in our FranCamp conferences, what we've been doing is modeling out and working with some brands where I feel like one of the things holding them back is that you get lost in this lead focus and you get lost in the franchise universe. And so many founders forget, what? We built this with passion. We're true entrepreneurs, but we're not telling our story. And so, if I shared, just want to get your take on a couple of things, and we could talk about it. And guys, these are, these are just some pioneering brands in FranCamp and whatnot. And the point of what I'm going to show is not selling services, but share ideas about how the focus is happening here. So let me see if I could do a screen share here on the Good Spark site. And I just want to get your focus. And Kelley, critical or not, and the idea is to share for everyone who's watching, share screen. Okay, so these are some amazing founders, right? Garage Floor, Preserve It and Be Organized. Big FranCamp attendees, and just all around great people. So on the Good Spark level, what I've seen is, you have these amazing founders who are not telling their story, right? And they have such amazing value for their. And so, for example, we've been going through founder stories, and really not much for us to do. It's having these conversations. And what I think a lot of brands and founders find out is that, there's so much more to our brand and there's a reason for our success. and that founder story, and telling that story. And I think it becomes very powerful because it starts addressing the things, because all of a sudden you think, what is that big thing? And it's a bunch of little things, and it's organizing those things and telling that story, which, from outside looking in, it's easier for us to tell someone else's story than it is for those founders. What's your thoughts on this? And more important, takeaways that for getting good Spark or FranCamp, that brands should be focused on right now that they could do themselves?
I think, immediately writing down your founder story. And I think, a lot of people get hung up on, it has to be this really, they're going to do a video, this really high end, video quality. I can't afford a videographer. I can't do a lot of these things. And I don't think that that's as important as just getting out your why, getting out your story, how you got started. I talk to people regularly, and I know you do as well. Like when you first start in particular, and this is kind of the general language we give, when you first start, it's so important. The founder story, people are buying you, they're not buying the store, they're not buying the brand, they're buying you. But that's a universal truth, I think. It's, I just was really thinking about this the other day, as I'm always telling people early on, the founder story is so important. It's always important. I mean, if we look at some of the biggest brands, biggest franchises out there, McDonald's, Wendy's, not a franchise, but Walmart, we all absolutely know who their founders were. Those big companies absolutely weaved that story, and those names were repeated. And that really becomes a part of the brand identity. So, I think it could be uncomfortable, especially for new founders in the space, to put yourself out there, because you were in your mind just a small business owner and you don't want to get out there. You're maybe not comfortable on, live stream. You're not comfortable talking about it, but it is such an, I don't want to say easy because it's not emotionally easy, but as far as systematic things to implement, an easy way to kind of set yourself apart from your competitors.
Kelley, and adding to that, right? So using the scenario of, and we all have this urge, even myself and my firm, rather than going to the next conference, which you probably should do anyway, or presenting or paying for sponsorship, to me, I think it's foundational for all of us at every point to sit down at the leadership level, again, starting from the bottom, meeting with the team. What's our core values? What's that value proposition for franchise buyers? How do we fit into the franchise world in terms of, how does a franchise transform the lives of our franchise buyers, right? From there, it's like, okay, so we have that genuine story, that genuine purpose. We know we're a supplemental income or income replacement business, or we know there's uniques with scalability or tech or team or, know-how, right? So from there, that starts giving the formula or the assets to start telling a genuine brand story, right? And positioning. And then I think ultimately from there becomes, what does our franchise sales process look like? Do we have leaks in a bucket? And then to get to the lead flow. Again, point being, I spoke to one franchisor who we couldn't work with. I didn't think we could help them. But I think they had a bunch of structural issues, and they weren't focused on it. They were focused on, hey, I just spent X dollars, so I'm going to be promoted in whatever publication to whatever people. And so it becomes a misdiagnosis of what's going on. So going through the chart, right, on the assessment, and again, everyone who's on this live stream, if you don't have the report, feel free to reach out to Kelley and our team, and we'll be glad to send you a copy of it. Lead sources that actually convert, where momentum breaks in sales process, and what differentiates the buying decisions. Kelley, could you share some insights there? What was your experience on what leads were better conversions versus others?
So it's interesting because Good Spark just posted about this on LinkedIn today. So I have two thoughts. I think one of the big things was identifying who we were competing against in our leads and marketing to those people. And we assumed fairly early on we were a dog concept, that we were competing against other dog concepts. And so we were putting a lot of dollars into going to people who were just shopping for dog concepts. And, later on, we realized that actually isn't who was looking for us. We were competing against everyone who was in the same investment range we were in, who was in home services, who was mobile. So really identifying who we were selling to was really good on cutting down conversion dollars and getting, a different type of lead. So that was an important realization. But one of the things I think for early founders, and one of the things I think some of our best leads were in collaborations. And I am a huge fan of collaborating in the franchise space. And so we were a mobile dog concept. So we collaborated with non-mobile dog concepts, pet stores that have retail spaces, groomers, on, do you have franchisees that might be interested in also being a franchisee of our product? There's a lot of ability for both to scale, especially in the beginning. It was really helpful for us to learn from these other franchisees what support systems are really working for you, what aren't, and help us build out our process. So I think, there's some really non-traditional, non-paid ways to break into the industry and to get in front of the right audience that, often aren't considered because we're just going straight toward, more traditional routes that over-index kind of on the number of leads versus the quality of leads.
And then Kelley, so you have a lead, great candidate, things should align, momentum breaks down. How would you diagnose that?
I think the momentum breaks down for a number of reasons. Obviously, there not being enough touch points. But anyone that I talk to that ever asks my opinion on this matter, I say it's typically because the initial outreaches are too cold. You're getting, thank you for applying, please fill out our application. Thank you for applying, please confirm that you have the right amount of cash, right? Like there are ways we can help people self-eliminate throughout the process. But this is where I think the founder kind of focus and realigning, like, what does that time look like? Being able to be so involved early in that sales process, reaching out to people and like personally having those conversations can be really important because, as they say, time kills deals. So does feeling like your response is the same generic response they got from the other 10 franchises that they inquired information from the night before. And so I think there's an opportunity to set yourself apart really early on that is often missed.
And Kelley, in the sales process, were there any big differentiators between the types of leads or conversion process between, say, an organic lead that defines the brand versus a broker introduced lead?
Very different, very different. And we actually had in our organization, we had two entirely different pipelines as to whether that lead came from a broker or whether that lead came from an organic source. And a lot of it was the nurturing portion of the campaign. Because we found with the broker leads in particular, a lot of those leads were heavily reliant on the information brokers were providing them about our brand, which is not bad. So those leads actually moved through a little bit quicker in our pipeline than the others, didn't include all of the same information, and were definitely more informative. So I want to say, and the organic was a little bit more of a warm, slower campaign because we were introducing ourselves to them. We didn't have that third party introduction. So I do think those, can and should be managed slightly differently.
Yeah, and strategically, what you're saying is important. And not to take this off topic, but legally too, I think as a franchise brand, when you're working with brokers and other parties, it's critical, guys, to make sure that there's alignment. No one's misrepresenting information about your system or about your disclosures, and you keep that very tight. I think good brokers will, they'll recognize very disciplined approach to your sales process, what you've disclosed, and how you go about the how do you go about it. Kelley, so we We talked about positioning. We talked about differences between organic leads and broker leads. When things do break down, or if they broke down, what were the missing gaps? Like, if a franchisor will hear often, I had a great lead, they were ready to convert, but something happened, like a family member. And to me, you always, you got to validate your systems. What I tell clients is, and again, we don't advise on sales, but when a lead goes cold, I mean, many times it's because there's a lack of clarity. That they thought this was great, maybe they liked you, it aligned, but something's holding them back. And maybe it's a lack of clarity about how you're going to help me succeed, how you're going to help me get my marketing up and running. What does the tech stack look like? What does a day in the life look like? What can success look like within parameters? Like, how important is that? And for everyone on this live stream, what's your advice to them now, where starting next week, they sit down with their team? How could they make their process better and more thoughtful?
I think, you just named it. It's identifying what are those, say, fear points, but it is, how will I find a location? How will I, find employees, which we don't help people find employees, right? We're not going to answer that question outright. Like, we're not going to say we hire them for you. But like, as you identify those touch points, start creating a small video library. Yeah, sure. They could go on and they could, read everything on your website, and you might have an FAQ on your website that addresses that topic. But most people aren't going to revisit your website after the first time they visit it to put in that inquiry. So if part of your drip campaign, if someone's gone cold after 3 weeks, they start getting these emails. They're like, we hear you. Here's how we help with site selection, or have you been considering how will you find employees? Send out these like kind of touch points that show people we've already anticipated what we might be making you uncomfortable, and here's the solution we already have for it. And those like constant check-ins. We had at least a handful of franchisees who were in those sort of like, they had life happened, who ended up signing with us years after they first put in an inquiry. One was almost 7 years after they first put in their inquiry. And so, I think keeping people engaged is so important. The other thing that I learned, and have learned the hard way, and I see other people do, is going all the way back to that 5%, which is time, is we did not have the capacity. So we kind of cut corners, but we had to make adjustments. One of which was we tried to make discovery days then, or approval days, just go to once a quarter, because we didn't have the capacity to keep having these 2.5-day discovery days once a month. When we did that, we saw a huge crack in the bucket and people, not wanting to wait for that much time to get in. And so, there's definitely, operational component there, but I think exactly what you mentioned is letting people know that you've already anticipated what their concerns are and have a solution for it. Ultimately, that's why people are buying a franchise in the first place.
Well, I love the advice. I mean, think about it, right? Rather than going to the next event, you spend time with your team saying, hey, how do we solve the pain point that if I bought this franchise, say it's a service-based one, how do we help them during the first 3, 6, 9 months to get the phone ring to build their business, right? And so rather than having a generic FDD that says, you need to spend X dollars, to start talking about what the game plan is on the marketing, maybe taking the funds up front, right? Or if you're in a technical business where I'm entering a new industry, maybe the focus should be on your 12-month mentorship program, where you have a dedicated advisor that helps you with proposals and helps you with estimates, and if there's subcontracting, help. So I think those are what seem like little things that take people to the next level of anticipating and understanding, should I buy this and can I do it? So I think that's a big factor, Kelley.
Absolutely.
Because it's always an important topic, and it goes beyond the scope of this, but as we get to, I want to talk about discovery days. And guys, just before, I just want to mention Fran Camp's coming up June 1. to 3 in New Jersey. It was an amazing event last year. And definitely check it out. Registrations are happening now, and it's in our home market, so it'd be great to see everyone. Kelley, just as an overview, and we're going to do a separate live stream on this topic, but I think especially emerging brands, and by the way, to our friend Adam, we're glad you're here. I appreciate that, Adam. Could you just give an overview, almost like a primer for anyone that, how you view what Discovery Day should be about, and general overview of how they should be thinking about it and where they should be focused?
Sure. Discovery Days, by the way, were my favorite part about being a franchisor. Like, I even thinking about them, I get energized. Like every morning, like I just love Discovery Days. So, I think in the beginning, a lot of franchisors really come into this thinking that the Discovery Day is like the closing sales pitch. And in my opinion, by the time they're coming to Discovery Day, we shouldn't still be selling anything. Like, this is an alignment meeting. This is, do we align? And so, I think it's important. And again, one of the big turning points for us is when we really put in place our evaluation process of Discovery Days. Because I think, it's so easy to go in thinking this person's here to evaluate our brand and whether we're a good fit. But as a franchisor, you need to have an equal evaluation process of, this person's coming in here, I need to evaluate whether they're a good fit for our brand as well. So, we actually had a really long Discovery Day. It was 2.5 days. I know a lot of people do a single day. Ours was very immersive. Every member of our team was included. And ours was, very collaborative, very solution-based. So a lot of time experiencing the product, experiencing the service. But us, we spent a lot of time in the beginning talking about the brand. They shouldn't be learning about the brand at Discovery Day. If so, you really need to beef up what's happening before they come. But us kind of, finishing that off, we talked about earlier, like taking away those insecurities. Our marketing team would come in and talk to them about the marketing solution. Our training team would do, some presentation on, here's what our training process looks like. We'd actually even do a few little training modules throughout it that were brand specific. So we could see, 1, how engaged was the potential franchisee. 2, did they follow the system we just taught? And 3, can they remember it by the next day? The next day we'd go through it again. And so, for them, it seemed like we were doing some really fun team building things. We loved that. There were meals peppered in, obviously, where we really got to know each other. But I think all that to say, the biggest piece of advice I would give franchisors is to remember that you are also evaluating that person. And I see so many franchisors get hung up on, I have 100% close rate on Discovery Days, so our brand is superior, we're killing it. Well, should you have had 100% close rate? Did you let some people through that maybe weren't a good fit? Just to make sure you keep that close rate high. And so I think that's, really having an actual system. What are you evaluating? Who on your team is evaluating? Is a good way to go into it, and really setting expectations on both sides and letting the franchisee know the expectations ahead of time as well.
As we approach 30-minute mark, Kelley, one of the last things I want to leave off with, because that's a great overview on Discovery. And guys, if you have any questions, let us know. But what were like the reasons or feeling where you had a candidate ready to sign at Discovery Day and you have to have a difficult conversation of, hey, I don't think this is a good fit? And what would be the reason? What were some of the reasons why for you?
3 that pop into my head immediately. We had one candidate came in who was very respectful to myself and the other senior team members, but very dismissive of our other staff. Automatic no-go for our culture. We had a second person who throughout the 2 days, and I mean, granted, we all have good and bad days, but could barely stay awake throughout any of it. Like, if you can't make it these 2, you're not going to make it through our training, which is quite extensive. But probably the most glaring was a potential candidate we had that every single thing we went through that our business offered, they provided a better solution or an alternative to what we were doing. And they didn't do this on any of the initial calls, but once in person, they're like, yeah, I know you guys are doing it this way, but have you considered this? I know this is, you really like this color blue, but this blue might be better. If they're trying to change your brand before they're a part of it, huge red flag. So it is a very awkward conversation, very difficult conversation, but we absolutely owe it to the rest of our franchisees to not let those bad apples come into the brand.
Great advice, Kelley. Hey guys, especially if you're a client and you want to connect with Kelley, and if you haven't already, reach out with Kelley. And it'd be great to see everyone at Fran Camp. And then our next live stream, hopefully everyone will be here. And if we could do anything, just let us know. But thanks, Kelley. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everybody. Have a great day.